Episode 1 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with a brief introduction to the continent of Tal'Dorei and the kingdom of Eamon. In this magical land which once boasted gods and titans, heroes are banding together to face a beast that is ravaging the lands. Even the mightiest warriors, it seems, are no match for this mysterious creature. The Tal'Dorei Council, led by Sovereign Uriel, brainstorms how to deal with this threat. They have sent out several bands of mercenaries with no luck. They would deploy General Krieg's army, but that seems an unwise action until they know who their enemy is. If only another mercenary group would step up for the task. Enter Vox Machina, a ragtag band of unlikely heroes with a less than stellar reputation in the kingdom. There's Vexalia of Ex-Vesser, a half-elf ranger, her twin brother Vaxildan the rogue, gnome cleric Pike Trickfoot, gnome bard Scanlan Shorthalt, Calith, a half-elf druid, Percival Derolo III, human gunslinger, and Grog Strongjaw, Goliath barbarian. Vox Machina offers their services in exchange for a hefty sum of gold. The council skeptically agrees, it's not as if they had anyone better in mind. Curiously, Vex feels a strange sensation at their meeting with the council. She feels something is off with one of the members, but doesn't mention this to anyone else. An airship transports them to the village where the beast was last spotted. The group interacts with villagers to get some more information, and they learn that the creature can fly. Vax gives a young boy a coin, promising that they will vanquish the monster for the sake of this town. Vox Machina treks up the mountains. They find human footprints and follow them to a lamb. Suddenly, the little animal is crushed by a towering great blue dragon. The heroes fight their foe without much luck. For a long time, Calith freezes in fear. When the dragon would crush them all, however, she saves them by conjuring plants to cushion their fall. As the dragon flies away, the group is left to nurse their wounds. Vex reveals that she is familiar with dragons. One of the beasts killed her and Vax's mother. She has studied them her entire life, hoping to find the very same creature. Vex can sense the presence of dragons. She received the same feeling from the dragon that she did in the midst of the Tal'Dorei Council. They all conclude that one of the council members must be in league with the winged creature. None except for Pike are keen on taking on the task, now that they know the risk. They return to the village, resolved to terminate their contract with the council. But the scene before them stops them in their tracks. The village has been completely destroyed. A wee cry catches their attention. It's the same child to whom Vax gave his coin. Pike tries to heal him, but has no power left from the fight, and the boy dies. To end the episode, Scanlan announces that they will be killing a dragon. Vax takes the blood-covered coin from the dead child. If they die in the attempt, he says, they will die gloriously. Episode 2 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with General Krieg giving his army a rousing speech as they prepare to battle the mysterious beast. The creature appears in the unexpected form of a blue dragon. It demolishes their forces in several gory displays of power. Vox Machina returns to the council and announces their discovery. The creature is a blue dragon? Of course, the council has already gleaned this information via General Krieg. Sovereign Uriel resolves that they fight the dragon head-on, despite Lady Kima's objections. Again, Vex experiences an off-putting sensation that seems to be coming from Sir Gregory Fince. After this meeting, Vex suggests they find Fince and try to find out what he is up to, if anything. Meanwhile, Pike and Vax visit Gilmore's Glorious Goods, a famed magic shop in the area. While they can't afford any weapons, they do manage to persuade Gilmore to give them some advice. The worm, Gilmore says, can only be defeated in a gorge where two rivers meet. They rejoin their friends and are able to track Sir Fince to General Krieg's manor. Suspecting Fince is going to try to assassinate the general, they break in. They catch Fince stealing documents. Just as Fince is about to confess to them that these papers would prove General Krieg's involvement in the recent crises, he is stabbed from behind. Fince falls forward to reveal Krieg standing behind him. Vex's senses overwhelm her not because of Fince, the feeling is coming from Krieg. Krieg flees, and they follow him into a portal that transports them to the dragon's lair in the mountains someplace far from Eamon. The general reveals his plan for the dragons to rule the entire world. Wiping out Uriel's army was all part of the plan. Krieg himself then transforms into his dragon form, known as Brimsith, the Iron Storm. Vox Machina just barely scrapes by in this fight. However, by a well-placed illusion and a stunning display of teamwork, they slay Brimsith. When the lair begins caving in around them, they must flee back through the portal without taking any of the dragon's loot. Back at the palace, Uriel rewards the mercenaries by making them protectors of the realm and honorary members of the Council of Tal'Dorei. To the chagrin of many in the group, he does not gift them with gold. But they do receive a deed to a manor, so that the council can keep their protectors close by. Vox Machina's involvement with the council does not end here. Uriel informs them that dignitaries are on their way to Eamon in order to discuss the security of the realm. Vox Machina is of course invited to the banquet. The episode ends by cutting to a scene that highlights the Lord and Lady Briarwoods. On their way to the banquet, bandits overtake their carriage. Lord Briarwood, however, bites one of them and overpowers the rest. Ominous music overlays the scene as the carriage approaches Eamon. Episode 3 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with the image of a young Percival surrounded by his family. Suddenly, his entire family is slain before him by unseen figures. Just as we catch sight of a shadowy presence, Percy wakes up. Everyone soon awakens in their spiffy new manner. Lady Allura arrives to remind them of tonight's dinner with the foreign dignitaries. The lady is less than impressed with their manners, but Percy promises to teach them the proper decorum for nobles. But Percy may just be the one to ruin their polite facade. Surprising everyone with their arrival are the dignitaries from Whitestone. Lady Delilah and Lord Silas Briarwood, who have never left their city before. Percy can barely maintain his composure. These are the people who killed his entire family. When Vox Machina finds out, they send Vax upstairs to sneak into the Briarwoods' room. During the dinner, Uriel mentions dark rumors about Whitestone to the Briarwoods. He implies that he may need to send troops to check on their city. They deny the rumors. Silas' eyes flash as he lays a hand on Uriel. He tells the sovereign not to worry, and Uriel suddenly agrees that Whitestone's independence shouldn't be challenged. Delilah notices Percy's presence and decides to mess with him. She mentions his family, the Derolos, and how they abdicated their power and abandoned Whitestone to rot. Percy stands, accusing her of lying. His friends apologize, and the Briarwoods excuse themselves from the table. Meanwhile, Vax finds a book in the Briarwoods' room that mentions the Whispered One. But Silas and Delilah catch him. Scanlan distracts the dinner party with a song, so the rest of the group can go up and help Vax. When Silas bites Vax and throws him out of a window, the fight is transferred outside. The Briarwoods are able to escape in their carriage, but they leave behind their driver, Desmond. Percy takes out his gun and shoots the man. He puts on a beaked black mask and, in a savage tone, tells Desmond his life is forfeit. Just as he is about to shoot again, Uriel bursts out and commands his guards to arrest Vox Machina. Episode 4 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with Uriel commanding Vox Machina's arrest. Vex tries to convince Lady Allura that Uriel is under the Briarwoods' influence. Allura takes their testimony under consideration, but says they will be placed under house arrest until they can get the Briarwoods' side of the story. As the Lord and Lady of Whitestone are fleeing, Delilah notices that their book is missing, the same that Vax stole in the last episode. Silas tells her not to worry, they have means of retrieving it. While the rest of the group tries to figure out what the Briarwoods book says, Pike sulks. Ever since Delilah hit her with a spell, she hasn't been able to do any magic, and feels as if the Everlight has left her. She doesn't tell her friends this, however. The others press Percy to reveal more about his connection to the Briarwoods. He says they initially came to Whitestone as allies. His own tutor betrayed his family to the couple, which was when they slaughtered his family. Percy says he was almost able to escape with his sister Cassandra. He doesn't finish his statement, but we see a flashback in which his sister is hit with arrows as they are trying to flee. After hearing this story, they all try to escape house arrest so they can act on the Briarwoods' threat. But the guards catch them and separate them into 3 groups. Caliph tries to encourage Percy by letting him know he's not entirely alone. She reveals that she may never see her family again. She must complete what's called an aramente to prove herself worthy. Only then can she return home. Although Percy says their situations are very different, he also tells her she's damn worthy. Vex and Vax muse that they could easily escape the guards' notice if they left without the group. With a look to each other and a, dare I say, fond glance toward Scanlan, it's decided they're staying. Pike, in the meantime, confesses to Grog her feeling that the Everlight has left her. Grog innocently suggests that the Everlight could be mad at her. Perhaps she just needs to apologize. Meanwhile, Silas and Delilah send creatures upon Vox Machina's keep to find the book. When they slay 5 guards, chaos ensues. The guards band together with Vox Machina to fight the skeletal, shadowy creatures that cause all the lights to go out. The creatures possess several of them, causing black liquid to stream out of their eyes and mouths. Pike tries to summon light to help them. Again, she can't. Percy calls out to a frightened Caliph that it's time to prove herself. For the first time, the druid summons a burst of sunlight. It allows them, finally, to be able to injure these foes. After the fight, the guards let them go. The next day, the group catches Percy attempting to leave for Whitestone. They say they are coming with him to beat Silas, end his hold on Uriel, and clear their names. Pike lingers behind, however. She thinks Grog was right. She can't hear the Everlight anymore and needs to tell her she's sorry. Grog offers to help, but she says she must do it alone. As the others trek toward Whitestone, it's only Grog and Scanlan who look back at Pike as she walks in the opposite direction. Episode 5 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with Vex, Vax, and Caliph attempting to steal vampire hunting supplies from Gilmore's shop after hours. The proprietor catches them mid-theft, and luckily, he's fond of them. They're able to purchase supplies from Gilmore, including a vial of holy water. The rest of the party manages to steal a carriage, and they head off for Whitestone. On the way, Scanlan tries to decipher Delilah's handwriting in her book, but the only word he can make out is ziggurat. Caliph says she studied about ziggurats in preparation for her Aramente. They are ancient structures used for contacting gods. Vex, meanwhile, notices that something is tracking them. Suddenly, mutant wolf-like creatures surround them. One of them captures Scanlan, who holds the book. Vox Machina chases after them to try and save Scanlan. When the beast jumps off a cliff with the gnome, Vex shoots an arrow towards him, with a rope attached. The party jumps off the carriage just before it crashes off the cliff. They have lost all of their supplies. And they think they have lost Scanlan too. However, just as they begin to mourn his loss, he rises up on his purple Bigby's hand. But he doesn't have the book. They instead see it in the mouth of one of the wolf creatures as it runs towards Whitestone to bring it to its master. Back at Whitestone, Delilah Briarwood consults Professor Anders about an upcoming ritual. Just then, a group of peasants arrives. The Briarwoods supposedly chose them for a special event. While her friends are adventuring, Pike approaches a temple on her own. She explains to a cleric that a dark mage cracked her holy symbol. She believes she is now cursed. The cleric assures her that, whatever happened, the Everlight accepts her as she is. Vox Machina sets up camp, meanwhile. Caliph tells Vax about her home and how she is supposed to be a leader someday. She becomes discouraged by some of Vex's earlier words. Vax tells her not to listen to his sister. He believes that she will make a great leader. Vex notices their exchange from afar and doesn't seem to like it. She tells her brother not to get distracted by pretty things. Vax assures her there is nothing to worry about. When asked, Percy describes Whitestone to everyone. It's a beautiful, lush land. At its center is the sun tree, a great tree that stood as a symbol of the Dorolo's ties to the city. When they arrive, the city is nothing like Percy described. Whitestone is practically a wasteland. Percy wants to find the holy woman of the town. If she is still there, they can trust her. But something stops him in his tracks. The episode ends by panning up to the sun tree. Hanging from it are the bodies of the peasants who attended the Briarwood special event. All of them dead and dressed to look like the members of Vox Machina. Episode 6 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins in the company of unfamiliar characters. An officer reports to a man named Archibald that giants have wiped out the entire eastern faction of Whitestone. This Archibald then commands his people to gather every able body in the city. A woman named Bryn strides in to report that the Briarwoods have moved the Kestrel to be with Professor Anders. Archibald says they will want to extract her. Just then, the room quakes around them. One of the aforementioned giants smashes into the ceiling. A grotesque-looking gray-skinned man, we later learn his name is Stonewell, enters to capture Archibald. As Vox Machina observes the horrible sight hanging from the sun tree, a woman tells them to get off the streets and hide. They conceal themselves just as a giant lumbers by. The woman notices the Dorolo crest on Percy and asks if they are part of the resistance. They deny it, but convince the woman to bring them to Yenin, the holy woman. Percy is certain she can help. When they find her, Yenin is giving a pacifist speech. Percy approaches her, and she immediately remarks that he has changed. Yenin takes them to an old resistance hideout. She tells them the only way they can win against the Briarwoods is if the resistance is strong enough. But the Briarwoods have taken their leader, Archibald Desnay, whom Percy grew up with. During this discussion, Caleth sees roots of the sun tree growing into the hideout. She asks if it can hear her and introduces herself as Caleth of the Ashari. Meanwhile, Pike meditates to seek the Everlight. When she calls for her, a fire bursts up and consumes her in her meditative state. She jolts awake and informs the clerics at the temple that her curse is preventing contact. One of the clerics assures her that no curse could do such a thing. Whatever is severing her connection to the Everlight is inside of Pike. Back at Whitestone, Stonewell brings in a towering man called Duke Vedmire to torture Archie. He says they know about his spy, the Kestrel. They want him to tell them where to find other confidants, including Vox Machina. All the while, Vox Machina breaks into the manor where Archie is being kept, and they pick up prisoners along the way. Just as they find Archie, Stonewell initiates a fight. He very nearly kills Scanlan. Vox Machina fights well, and they believe they can escape with Archie. However, they realize that Percy has gone missing. Percy chased after Stonewell. We see him with his mask on. Shadows rise from his gun, they cover his body. He points the gun at Stonewell, exclaiming that he will take vengeance for the Dorolos. He then shoots Stonewell, then takes off his mask to show his face. Percy? Stonewell recognizes him just before he is shot several times. Vax rushes onto the scene, and Percy turns to point his weapon at his friend. Vax scolds him for compromising their mission, but Percy just yells at him that on one will stand in his way as the last living member of the Dorolo family. Archie then gently corrects him. He is not the last of the Dorolos. His sister Cassandra lives. While the rest of the party finishes up the fight, the scene cuts to the Briarwoods manor. Delilah stands behind Cassandra. She acknowledges that the young woman must have heard about her brother. However, she says, this changes nothing. Episode 7 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with another flashback of Percy's life in Whitestone. In it, Professor Anders gives a young Percival and Cassandra a lesson on the city's namesake, the Whitestone that is mined from the mountains. When refined, Whitestone becomes residuum glass, a powerful arcane amplifier. In the flashback, Professor Anders requests funding from the Dorolos to help triple their residuum production. Percy's father declines, and Anders stews in bitter hatred toward the entire family. In the present day, Vox Machina escapes with Archie to the safe house. They pressure Percy to explain what came over him. He divulges the origins of his pepper box pistol. After the Briarwood slaughtered his family, he fled. Struggling for survival, he was constantly plagued with visions of his family's deaths. The desire for vengeance kept eating at him. Then, he says, a new vision visited him. He dreamt up a weapon and then invented it. On it are the names of those he swore to kill. Anders, the Briarwoods, Anna Ripley, and Stonefell. He doesn't mention to whom he promised this mission. All while he explains this, Caleth experiences her own vision. She places her hands back onto the sun tree. She sees the tree degenerating, a dark magic working at its roots. No magic she attempts helps its recovery. Archie tries to convince Percy to help him reclaim Whitestone, but Percy can only think of reuniting with his sister Cassandra. Luckily, the resistance leader believes they can accomplish both. He also makes reference to Cassandra as the aforementioned Kestrel. Vox Machina needs a distraction for all the guards placed in Anders' house. Scanlan immediately volunteers. Though everyone is skeptical of his abilities, Vex uncharacteristically gives him the benefit of the doubt. Although the bard struggles in that he has no idea what he's doing, he pulls off his task in typical Scanlan fashion, with exceedingly dramatic flair. After a sequence of drinking several mysterious potions, Scanlan manages to set fire to much of the place and cause guards to run outside. He narrowly escapes death himself. Vox Machina takes advantage of the distraction and rushes in. Percy finds Anders holding his sister captive. He raises his pepperbox, but he's too late. Anders slits Cassandra's throat right in front of him. The episode ends with a close-up of Percy's face, quivering and horrified. He must watch his last remaining relative die in front of him again. Episode 8 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with Pike seeking the Everlight's guidance. In her vision, dark vines grasp her, and she stirs out of it, panting. The clerics surrounding her say she's taking on too much. Pike disagrees. If they won't help her find the Everlight, she'll do so on her own. Back at Whitestone, Vax and Calith burst into the room as Anders slits Cassandra's throat. Calith rushes forward to try to heal her, but she isn't confident she can. A green light begins healing Cassandra, but Percy doesn't see. He's going after Anders, who awakens suits of armor to fight for him. The rest of Vox Machina joins Percy, but the fun has only just begun for Anders. He licks his lips with a silver tongue and declares that Grog will kill his friends for him. Suddenly, the mighty barbarian turns against his friends. Unaware of her friend's trouble, Pike plunges herself into darkness again. She screams for the Everlight, and the place becomes charged with fire as the being appears. The Everlight tells the gnome that lies will not lead her back to the light. Vox Machina meanwhile fights Grog, but he tanks most of their hits. When Vex points an arrow at Anders, he licks his lips again and takes control of everyone but Percy. Percy's friends corner him. To buy time, he apologizes to the professor. He says his father never recognized his brilliance. Anders says he isn't fooled, but Percy has already bought the time he needed. His eyes blacken, and shadowy tendrils rise from him as he points his gun to Anders and shoots him in the head. Just as Cassandra would have died, Anders chokes in a pool of his own blood. Percy puts his mask on to finish him off. His pepperbox glows red, displaying Anders' name on the barrel. He shoots the professor again, and he falls out of the window to his death. They go inside to quickly clear the house, and Percy reunites with his sister. Cassandra is somewhat bitter towards him for leaving her behind. She says the Briarwoods have been parading her around Whitestone as someone who is loyal to them. All this time, however, she's been feeding information to the Resistance. Vex then finds a star chart in the house that points to the solstice, which is 5 days from now. That's supposedly how much time they have before Delilah begins the ritual. To give hope to the people of Whitestone, Calith causes the clouds in the sky to form the Dorolo crest. But Delilah sees the symbol as well. In response, she slits the throat of her steward and casts a spell with his blood and residuum glass. She tells Silas she's doing this to protect him. Then the dead in Whitestone begin rising out of their graves. Again, we see Pike screaming. The Everlight tells her she has been lying. Pike admits that she has left the path of righteousness. Her friends can be violent. They drink, fight, and curse, but she loves every second of it. She says she put Vox Machina before the Everlight. The goddess assures her that Pike can be whoever she wants to be in her light. So, she asks, who is she? Pike shuts her eyes tight, preparing to answer before the scene cuts back to the group. Scanlan, returning from his solo mission, finds his friends and warns them of zombies. He's a bit late, however. The episode ends with a horde of undead closing around Vox Machina. Episode 9 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with a flashback of Silas Briarwood lying sick in bed. A doctor claims there is nothing to be done for him, but Delilah doesn't accept it. She finds a book that glows with purple energy and gasps when she discovers a particular spell in it. Using some of her own blood, she performs the ritual over her husband. His color improves, and he wakes. She hugs him, but the mirror shows her embracing the air. Neither can she feel his heart beating. In the present day, the Briarwoods kiss. Delilah tells Silas to trust the Whispered One and to stay in the manor, where he is safe. Vox Machina holes up in a safe house with Archie and others to hide from the undead. Several become discouraged about the state of Whitestone. Cassandra and Archie try to convince Percy to take leadership, only he can bolster their spirits. But he refuses. The undead then burst into the room, and one bites Scanlan's arm. Necrosis sets in, which is beyond Caeleth's healing capabilities. He'll lose his arm within the hour. They're but now zombies, giants, and Vedmire are all after them. In the midst of the fight, Archie again tries to persuade Percy to lead the resistance. Soon after, Vedmire kills Archie with his blade. Cassandra implores Percy to inspire the people to fight. So in the wake of his friend's death, as Caeleth staves off the undead, he gives a rousing speech. Everyone fights with new vigor, but they say platitudes, as if this will be their last fight together. Vax tells Caeleth he loves her, to which she responds that this is definitely not the appropriate time. Just as they would surrender, a glowing yellow light appears and pulses outward, taking care of several undead creatures. It's Pike. Although she's just an astral projection, her body is still at the temple. She steps forward to heal Scanlan's arm and joins in the fight with the Everlight on her side. The Everlight blesses everyone's weapons, renewing them for more battle. Percy and the people of Whitestone take revenge on Vedmire for Archie. The Briarwoods are watching all of this from afar. Silas wants to go to the front line, but Delilah says he is too valuable. Vox Machina has left her no choice. She must accelerate her plans. Yennefer and her people take over the fight, so Vox Machina can make their way to the Briarwoods through some secret tunnels. On the way, one of the Briarwoods prisoners calls out to them. She claims she can help them if they release her. As Vax would free her, Percy levels his gun at the prisoner, his mask on. Just before the episode ends, Caeleth yells, "Percy, wait." Episode 10 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with Percy's gun glowing with Dr. Anna Ripley's name as he levels the pepperbox at the prisoner. A flashback shows Ripley helping the Briarwoods torture Percy for secrets of Whitestone. Cassandra convinces him not to shoot. Dr. Ripley may just be able to help them find the Briarwoods. Percy's reaction stokes some of Vox Machina's lingering concerns about the darkness that has been taking over him. Pike, still an astral projection, lays her hands on him to sense what could be causing this change. A vision shows Percy on fire, with dark claws that slash at Pike. She tells him he must go to a temple as soon as possible. But Percy's immediate concern is stopping the Briarwoods. He grudgingly agrees to hold off on killing Dr. Ripley so she can show them the way forward. While the people of Whitestone fight against the Pale Guard, Dr. Ripley leads Vox Machina through the dungeons, and they fend off a few undead on the way. Eventually, they come across a residuum factory. The Briarwoods are producing tons of the substance, but Dr. Ripley says she doesn't know why. Everyone is distracted by the room, so it's a shock to Percy when his gun suddenly glows with the name Cassandra DeRollo. They all look up to find that Cassandra is across the room, just about to close a door and leave them all behind. Vax rushes forward and is just able to make it to the other side. Percy screams for his sister to no avail. The Briarwoods then appear behind Cassandra to tell her she has done well. Silas casts a spell over Vax to control him. As Percy sinks to his knees, Cassandra tells him he has brought this on himself by abandoning her. The Briarwoods are her family now. They leave with Vax in tow. But first, they trigger a trap. The doors close all around Vox Machina and Ripley, and the room begins filing with acid. Scanlan gathers everyone onto his magic hand so they can rise up to the ceiling. Percy remains frozen, so Vex slaps him into waking up. She says that Cass may be gone, but she and the rest of his friends will never abandon him, and they need his help. This rouses Percy out of his trance to help the others. He and Dr. Ripley figure out that there are 2 switches that will reverse the trap if pulled. The problem is that one of the switches is sitting at the bottom of the acid pool. Grog doesn't ask any questions. He simply strips down and dives for it. He's in excruciating pain, but with Pike healing him throughout the whole endeavor, he manages to pull the switch, just as Percy and Dr. Ripley take care of the other one. As the acid recedes, Vox Machina is able to press forward. The episode ends with the Briarwoods approaching the ziggurat. Delilah says the ritual will require a blood sacrifice. She then turns to look back at Vax. Episode 11 of The Legend of Vox Machina begins with Delilah's statement that the celestial alignment is almost complete. She begins her ritual at the ziggurat, and the whole structure glows green as Vox Machina approaches. Scanlan realizes Delilah's book wasn't a spell book, it was an instruction manual that has to do with the Whispered One. Pike recognizes the name as an undead creature that seeks to return to this plane. The solstice marks the best time for such a creature to cross over. Delilah tells Silas that the Whispered One is coming. When it does, she and Silas will be together forever. Ripley flees after failing to convince Percy to come with her and give up the fight. As she runs, darkness momentarily overtakes Percy, and a voice says he is letting his prey go. Cassandra distracts Percy, however, by willingly offering her neck for Silas to bite. Percy rushes towards them, commencing the fight. Vex keeps a possessed Vax at bay, while Cassandra attacks Percy. Cassandra's name glows on his gun, and Percy's mask starts to take over, but he fights the urge to shoot her. Meanwhile, Caliph is running out of energy by fighting Silas. When the vampiric foe turns on Scanlan, Pike rescues the gnome who subsequently swoons. Silas turns his attention to Percy to slash his throat. Interestingly, Cassandra's eyes flash gold. She briefly remembers the Briarwoods torturing her and Percy before Silas possesses her again. Vex struggles against her brother, so she calls out to Caliph to do something. But the druid is weak. She falls to the ground. Just then, she notices roots growing there. It's the sun tree. She asks for the tree's help, and vines begin to grow around her hand and her staff until a light shoots upward from the staff. It causes Vax to snap out of his possession and empowers Pike to fight against Delilah. Grog takes hold of Silas, pinning him in place. Caliph directs her light toward him. He burns in the sunlight until he is nothing but ash. Silas' name then disappears from Percy's gun. Whatever being that is controlling Percy screams that the kill should have been his. At the same time, Cassandra is released from Silas' spell, and Delilah runs into the ziggurat, closing the door behind her. She panics, saying out loud, supposedly to the Whispered One, that she has done everything asked of her, including taking Whitestone. She asks the Whispered One to honor its bargain and bring Silas back. Delilah then cuts her arm for one last ritual. Black, caged creatures writhe around her, and a green light shoots up in front of her. Vox Machina then rushes into the room and attacks. Vex shoots an arrow into Delilah's back, who then turns around to throw a burst of magical energy back at her. But Caliph jumps in front of her to take the full brunt of the blow. She falls to the ground, and Vex screams. A cloaked figure appears before Delilah, and electrifying green light shoots into the sun tree. The veins in Delilah's face grow increasingly black. Then the cloaked figure disappears. Delilah screams that this can be all there is just before Percy shoots her. In all the commotion, Pike runs to Caliph to perform a healing spell. Just before she does, her connection is severed. Pike wakes up in her physical form, back at the temple and without having healed her friend. Vax says Caliph will die if they don't do something fast. Delilah lies still on the ground. But the episode ends with a sphere of black and purple magical energy spinning in the middle of the ziggurat. Episode 12 of The Legend of Vox Machina picks up after Scylla's death and Delilah's defeated ritual. As necrosis sets in Caliph's body, Vox Machina realizes they need to do something fast. Is Delilah Briarwood still alive? Delilah did survive the fight at the ziggurat, but she has no strength left. Percy is ready to kill her anyway. Obviously not himself, he belittles Caliph's situation and points his gun at Delilah's head, ready to shoot at any moment. Cassandra is equally cold with her, dragging her away when Scanlan points out that they should get away from the spinning black orb that's been interfering with magic. Delilah tells Percy to go ahead and kill her. Her ritual failed, and she has no hope. But Percy says her pain will be drawn out and tortuous. He puts his mask on and points his pepperbox to Delilah's mouth. Scanlan tries to intervene, but Percy shoots a burst of black energy into him, knocking him to the ground. Black smoke curls all around Percy. Do Vax and Scanlan heal Caliph? When the necrosis first started to spread, Vex administered Caliph an elixir. However, they were too close to the ziggurat's black sphere for the magic to work. Everyone moves away from the orb, so Vax asks for another elixir, but there isn't one. Without Pike to heal her, Vax doesn't know what to do. He lays down Caliph to rest, holds her hand, and kisses it. But just then, an idea sparks. He gathers herbs, just as Caliph would have done. Scanlan then adds his own magical tunes to assist with Vax's efforts. Then they wait. For a long time, it doesn't seem to be doing anything. But when Percy's curse is brought up, Caliph sits up and speaks. What is the curse of Percy's pepperbox pistol? When smoke rises from Percy, thicker than ever before, Vex muses that something is possessing him. We are better for it, a voice comes from Percy. Caliph says it isn't Percy speaking, but a demon. And that if it gets what it wants, Percy's vengeance on Delilah, there may be nothing of Percy left. The subtitles call this demon Orthax, but I believe his name is otherwise never stated. Vex approaches Percy. Darling, she says, take off the mask. The mask drops to show Percy sobbing, his eyes black. He says Orthax won't allow him any control. He tries to shoot himself just to end the misery, but the demon stops him. Orthax urges Percy to kill Delilah and his friends when they step in his way. The demon gives him visions of his family to spur his revenge. As Percy attacks his friends, Orthax rises from him in his full form, a wolf-like shadow beast. Percy asks him who he is, but Orthax replies that Percy already knows. Percy's thirst for vengeance called Orthax to him. When he created his pistol, he made a bargain with the creature. Orthax gives him the power to avenge his family, while Percy feeds the demon the souls of his victims. Does Vox Machina free Percy from the demon? Cassandra yells at Percy that this is not who he is, that he must fight, so that he doesn't hurt the people he loves. Vex too urges him to remember himself. But Orthax's voice clashes with theirs. He tells Percy he knows who he should trust. Percy agrees and smiles. Then, he shoots his own hand. Smoke pours out of him and puffs out all around him. Percy is finally himself again. How does Delilah die? Delilah laughs at this outcome. She says Percy has shown weakness in not being able to kill her. Percy is forgiving with her. He knows the pain of losing a loved one, as she lost Scylla's. But Delilah isn't touched. She says the Whispered One will finish what she started. She starts a speech about how cities will fall and rivers will flow with blood. But before she can finish, Cassandra stabs her in the throat. She says she's glad Percy could forgive Delilah, but she could not. What happens to Percy's gun? Percy goes to pick up his pepperbox, convinced that Orthax is no longer living inside. Scanlan is skeptical, however. The bar kicks the gun into a pool of acid, and the demon can be seen briefly, screaming in defeat. Well, I'll be damned, says Percy. He thanks Scanlan and everyone else for saving him. Does Caliph tell Vax she loves him? Back at the Sun Tree, everyone recovers from the battle, and the people of Whitestone thank Vox Machina for their service. Vax approaches Caliph to tell her that he meant what he said earlier. He does love her. Caliph smiles and says no one has ever said that to her before. However, she says they can be together. Both of them have too many responsibilities. Caliph and Vax may not be able to make it work, but it seems that she and Vex are finally on the path to becoming friends. Vex witnesses the interaction between Caliph and Vax and sighs, disappointed. Will Percy or Cassandra rule Whitestone? Ensuing the downfall of the Briarwoods, Percy tells Cassandra that she is the true heir of Whitestone and should take over its rule. Cassandra worries that their people will see her as a traitor, but Percy comforts her. She can ensure that the city lives forever. She smiles, encouraged. What happens to the black orb in the ziggurat? Scanlan asks Yennefer for her opinion on the spinning black sphere that resulted from Delilah's ritual. The holy woman believes it is connected to something beyond the veil. She sent one of her men to investigate it. As she says this, however, the scene changes to show us the holy man. He reaches out to the orb. As his body decays into a skeleton, he gets sucked into the sphere. Vox Machina is completely unaware. How does the legend of Vox Machina Season 1 end? Caliph transports Vox Machina through the Sun Tree, back to Eamon, where Sovereign Uriel honors them and makes an announcement to the city. He says his judgment was corrupted by the Briarwoods, and, as a result, Tal'Dorei was plagued by evil. This, along with Vox Machina's success, made him realize that a group is stronger than an individual. So, he cedes the government to the Council of Tal'Dorei. As he wraps up his speech, Vex suddenly doubles over. She experiences a ringing and pain in her head, the same that denotes the presence of dragons. Shortly after, warning bells toll. The season concludes with 4 dragons flying toward Eamon. Are the dragons connected to episodes 1 and 2? They must be. Back in episode 2, General Krieg Aka Brimsith, the Iron Storm, revealed his plan for dragons to rule the entire world. In a stone wall of Brimsith's lair, we briefly caught a glimpse of 4 draconic eyes, 1 open and 3 closed. These likely represent the 4 dragons we saw in the season finale. If so, the legend of Vox Machina has been setting up the major conflict for Season 2 ever since Episode 1 of this season. The last episode, Ending Explained. Another round for Vox Machina? The greatest band of mercenaries in all the realm. It turns out that this introduction to the ragtag adventuring party in Episode 1 rings true. In the span of just 12 episodes, we've seen the unlikely heroes come a long way. The Darkness Within delivers a satisfying and ominous resolution to the Revolution of Whitestone, while tying the overall season conclusion back to the first 2 episodes. The episode ends by showing us changed individuals. With Percy's newfound freedom, Pike's new sense of self, Vex's new respect for Calith's ever-growing power, and the Druid's rejection of Vax, we are going to see a fresh group dynamic for writers to play with next season. And if you recall from episode 1, Vex pledged to hunt down the dragon that killed her mother. This episode may be setting up an important arc for Vex and Vax in the next season. Not everything wrapped up so tidily, of course. The reason for Calith's miraculous healing was left a bit too vague for my liking. I also wish we could have had a short scene resolving the fight between the people of Whitestone and the Pale Guard. But the show still managed to resolve quite a lot in this finale, while leaving us much to look forward to. In addition to the threat of the dragons, we may yet see more of Anna Ripley and the Whispered One. What did you think of the series finale? Let us know in the comments box.